What if I told you the Supreme Court, the most powerful court in America, almost lost all its authority in its first major case? What if, to survive, it had to pretend to lose, just to win forever? This is the story of Marbury versus Madison, the clever, political, and downright genius case that secretly gave the Supreme Court its superpower, judicial review, and made it an equal branch of government. But it all started with one messy presidential transition, some undelivered paperwork, and a Chief Justice who outsmarted both the President and Congress. The year is 1800. The young United States is deeply divided between two political parties. The Federalists, led by President John Adams, believe in a strong national government. The Democratic-Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, want more power for the states. And in the bitter election of 1800, Jefferson wins. For the first time, one political party is losing power peacefully to another. But Adams and his Federalists aren't ready to go quietly. In his final days as president, literally his last night in office, Adams makes a desperate move. He fills dozens of new government positions with Federalists loyal to him. These appointments are called the Midnight Judges. Among those appointed was a man named William Marbury. Adams signed his commission. The Senate confirmed it. Everything was done except one tiny step, delivering the paperwork. And that's where things went wrong. When Jefferson took office, his new Secretary of State, James Madison, found those undelivered commissions sitting on his desk. Jefferson told Madison, "Don't deliver them." And just like that, Marbury and several others were denied the jobs they were promised. So what does Marbury do? He sues. But not just any lawsuit. He goes straight to the Supreme Court, demanding that the court issue what's called a writ of mandamus. A writ of mandamus is a legal order that commands a government official to do their duty. In this case, Marbury wanted the court to force Madison to hand over his commission. Seems simple enough, right? The law even said the Supreme Court could do that. But there was a problem, and it was about to change American history. The case lands in the hands of Chief Justice John Marshall, a brilliant Federalist himself, and ironically, Adams's former Secretary of State, who had forgotten to deliver those commissions in the first place. Marshall faced a no-win situation. He and the court had to answer three crucial questions. First, did Marbury have a right to his commission? Second, if he had a right, and that right was violated, do the laws of the country offer him a remedy? Third, if so, can the Supreme Court issue that remedy, the writ of mandamus, to enforce it? The answers would determine not just Marbury's fate, but the fate of the court itself. Here's the trap. If the court ruled for Marbury and ordered Madison to deliver the commission, President Jefferson could just ignore them. The court had no army, no enforcement power. That would make the court look weak. But if they ruled for Jefferson, it would look like the court was bowing to political pressure, also weak. So what could Marshall do? He couldn't win by force, so he chose to win by logic. Marshall's opinion was a masterpiece. First, he said Marbury was right. He did have a legal claim. Second, he said the government had wronged him by not delivering the commission. But then came the twist. Marshall said the law that gave the Supreme Court the power to issue writs of mandamus, the Judiciary Act of 1789, was unconstitutional. Congress had given the court a power that the Constitution itself did not allow. So even though Marbury deserved his job, the court couldn't legally help him. And here's the brilliant part. The court appeared to give up power granted to it by Congress, but in doing so, it claimed a far greater power. the authority to decide what the Constitution itself allows. By limiting its own jurisdiction, the court gained the ultimate ability to declare when Congress or the President had gone too far. It looked like surrender, but it was actually strategy. On the surface, Jefferson and Madison won. Marbury didn't get his commission. The President got what he wanted. Jefferson probably smiled, thinking he'd humbled the Federalist-controlled court. But behind that polite opinion, Chief Justice Marshall had done something extraordinary. By declaring a law of Congress unconstitutional, he established the principle of judicial review, the idea that the Supreme Court has the final say on what the law means and whether it violates the Constitution. This meant that from that day forward, the court could strike down acts of Congress and the President that violated the Constitution. It had given itself a new power, one not explicitly listed in the Constitution, and no one even realized how big it was at the time. Marshall's decision looked like a loss, but it was actually the boldest power grab in Supreme Court history. The executive branch got a small, short-term victory, but the judicial branch gained the authority to check both Congress and the President permanently. From then on, the court could say, no, that law, that action, is unconstitutional. It could protect rights, shape policy, and define the meaning of the Constitution itself. And here's the lasting impact. Even today, the Supreme Court uses Marbury versus Madison as the foundation for its power to hear and decide constitutional cases. Every time the court reviews a law, strikes one down, or rules on whether government actions violate the Constitution, it's relying on the precedent set in Marbury versus Madison. All because John Marshall made one brilliant strategic decision: to lose the battle but win the war. So next time you hear about the Supreme Court striking down a law, remember this. That power, the power to decide what the Constitution means, came from one forgotten commission, one political feud, and one very clever Chief Justice. This is how Marbury versus Madison made the Supreme Court what it is today, the final word in American law. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most important Supreme Court cases in U.S. history, hit that like button, subscribe for more epic legal showdowns, and drop a comment. Do you think John Marshall was a genius or a manipulator? Thanks for listening. And remember, in law and politics, sometimes the smartest move is the one that looks like a loss.